Cover some basic phone procedures here. First of all, some major concepts of the phone. The major concept we're going to be paying attention to is the new patient calling in phone. So, what are some major concepts you have to train your staff? You have to train your staff the differences in the relationship. Where is this relationship relative to trust, confidence, defenses, and resistance? So those are four things you want to pay attention to: trust, confidence, defenses, and resistance. If you don't know this, you need to write it down because we're always going to be working on these four factors: trust, confidence, defenses, and resistance. We're going to pay we're always going to pay attention to those wherever the patient's at in the relationship, okay? Because it's going to be very different. The next major concept is called present time consciousness. Where is the patient in the relationship? Well, and so many chiropractors don't understand this. They talk to patients uniformly. They say the same information uniformly, and you cannot. Everybody is different in the buying cycle. And a good example is, what can you say to a friend who's been a friend of yours for a year, 2 or 3 years? Look how much you can say to that person versus somebody you've just met at church. It's that different. You have to understand, you cannot just say the same thing about chiropractic anywhere along the cycle of the patient. And what is especially important is the fragility of the patient. And when does it all start? When they call in. It's the absolute most fragile, sensitive time of the relationship. That phone call. That, and then of course, the first visit of all the visits, that's the most important visit. What visit is the second most important visit? Day 2. What's the third most? Day 3. See, and then as the trust and confidence builds and defense and resistance decrease, I have a lot more parameters of what I can and can't say. And where are they in the buying cycle? Well, I can say a lot of things to somebody who's been in 20 visits that I would never, ever say to somebody who I haven't seen on the outside I'm trying to get in, or a day 1, 2, or 3 or 4 patient. I would never. That's like maintenance care. I'd never talk about anything like that for very specific buying reasons. So we have to know about this concept called present time consciousness. Your staff has to know about this thing called present time consciousness. That's like, I remember this doctor was doing these Groupons for massage. Well, they were coming in for massage, not chiropractic. And then the doctor didn't train the staff. And so this patient comes in for a massage and the staff member says, "Oh, I see you're another, it's good to meet you, Mary. I see you're another one of our new chiropractic patients." That immediately created a defensive reaction. The patient went into no. Oh, no. I'm not here for chiropractic. I'm here for the massage. Immediately, that staff member created a problem. Now it made it much harder to convert that patient over to massage because present time consciousness was not taught. So when I say present time consciousness, what am I referring to? I'm referring to the purchase cycle. How do we purchase? Okay. So what is the purchase cycle? We're going to pay a lot of attention to that. All right. So the purchase cycle is needs analysis, presentation, obstacles, close. That's the purchase cycle. Needs analysis, presentation, obstacles, close. You violate that, you lose. And that's the purchase cycle. So we're going to pay attention to that. In other words, if it's new in the relationship, I'm not going to be talking about the close. I'm not going to be talking about the common obstacles relative to the presentation. I'm not going to be talking about a presentation. The only thing I want to do is establish need to get them in. That's it. So there's only one objective when they're on the phone, and that's to get them in. That's it. And when they come in, there's only one objective. It's to get them to day 2. It's called present time. We're not going to talk about anything else. We're not going to talk about need, time, or money in any one of these other corridors. And you got to think of them as like corridors. You're not allowed to talk The staff's not allowed to talk to a day 3 patient with day 2 information. They're not allowed to talk about day 2 information to a day 1 patient relative to need, time, or money. Because a day 1 patient is very different in their need, especially if they haven't even been through the consultation, examination, or patient education. They're in a very different position of their need relative to time or money than, say, even a day 2 patient or a day 3. I mean, there's a huge difference between just a day at the end of day 3 and the beginning of day 1, just in the terms of value and establishing need and, all these need, presentation, and obstacles. We're so far down the train tracks at the end of day 3. It's night and day compared to the beginning of day 1. And you have to understand this. You cannot just talk and say anything you want anywhere in the course of this relationship. So that's a key point, called present time. It's divided into, if they're on the outside, to get them in. In other words, now we're talking about the phone call. What's the next segment? Day 1. There's only certain things that we're going to be dealing with day 1. Well, I don't need to talk about the things that I need to on day 1 to get them in. I need to talk about day 1 things now, relative to need, time, or money. And by the way, that's what we're always going to be paying attention to. Need, time, or money. Those are the 3 big ones. Need, time, or money relative to patient segmentation with specific times and what you can and can't say or do or don't say. Okay. All right. Even within day 1, I mean, some of these topics are so fragile. I'll give you an idea. Have the patient come in on day 1 and immediately start talking about money and how much it cost. That alone is a total violation because need hasn't even been established yet. It's a total violation of how we normally purchase as human beings subconsciously. It's need equals time or money divided by trust. That's how we purchase subconsciously. You cannot violate that. So that's another example. And I had that with a patient. I had one doctor. We saw a huge dropout rate on day 1. And we go, well, let's do a breakdown analysis and go, well, what's going on with day 1? So I just literally went through step by step. Patient comes in. What happened? What happened next? What happened next? What happened next? I mean, in great detail. And what we found out is as soon as they come in, they're moving them over to the insurance person. And the insurance person is telling them how much it's going to cost and what the insurance does not cover. In other words, they're magnifying the hell out of the obstacle right out of the blocks. And the patient doesn't even know if the doctor can help them, doesn't even know what the problem is, if the doctor can help, how long, none of that. And we're just magnifying the hell out of the obstacles of money. Well, he was running them off. And then he said to me, but the emergency rooms do that. Well, who's in an emergency? Where's the perceived need with the people that go to the emergencies on a scale of 0 to 10? Where's the perceived need of chiropractic patients when they come in on a scale of 0 to 10? The emergency room probably could even spank them in the ass and they'd stay because the need is so high. Well, that's not the way it is with a chiropractic patient. So anyway, we want to pay a lot of attention to what's called present time consciousness relative to need, time, and money. So on the outside, when I'm trying to get them in, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to establish need and minimize the obstacles of time or money as much as possible. And we teach how to do that. That's how we'll get new patients. Okay. That's how we'll get them to call. That's how we'll schedule appointments. That's the formula. I'm not going to magnify the obstacles of money or time. And they haven't even been in the office yet. Okay. And I'm not going to talk about how I can help the problem when I don't even know what the problem is. It's a total violation again. I'm not going to violate what's my problem. Can you help? How long is it going to take to feel better? And how much does it cost? I am not going to violate that. That's the order that the patients want information. The order that we need to bring them in is need equals time versus money divided by trust. So on the outside, I'm only going to establish need and minimize the obstacles. That gets the phone call. Okay, now there's a phone call. So now it's present time consciousness with the phone call, the new patient phone call. There's only one objective: get them in the office that day or the next day. That's it. That's the only objective on the phone. So what does that mean? It means I want to pay attention to not violate that formula. There's two formulas where we're looking at. One is the patient, because the patient wants to know, can you help? Or what's my problem? Can you help? How long is it going to take to feel better? What it's going to cost? I'm not going to violate that. And I'm not going to violate need and time and money. In other words, I don't want to, as soon as they come in, I don't want to start magnifying, how much time it's going to take and how much money it's going to cost. Okay. And you'll just naturally lose patients left and right when you do this. So go ahead and don't schedule patients, ask for a lot of money, and you'll just start losing patients left and right. You want to do the opposite. Okay. So these are big concepts. These are major big concepts. So let's go past the first, which is somebody on the outside trying to get them in. Okay. We cover that separately. And then also remember that most patients, when they call in, the minority of them will not have any obstacles. You can be guaranteed the majority will have at least one obstacle, sometimes two. That's just a guarantee. So should your staff know how to handle the common obstacles? Yeah. Are they going to be asked the common obstacles routinely? Yes. Have they been trained in how to handle the obstacles? They better be, or you'll start losing patients. So we're going to pay attention to the obstacles. And then that gets to the next question. And I call it, the questions are either what I call major, minor, or curiosity. And you have to know when there's a question's being asked, is it a major question? Is it a minor question? Or is it curiosity? Because there's different degrees of importance. Well, here's how it works. You don't answer a major question, you get fired one time. One time you don't handle it, it's over. They'll give you 3 strikes with a minor. You cannot answer that 1 or 2 times and still be, but the 3rd time they'll fire you. Fire you meaning they're not coming back. Curiosity questions you don't even have to answer because they're not that important to the patient. It's just curiosity. So they won't even fire you if you don't even answer those. So you go, well, what's the definition of a major? Need, time, or money. Anytime the patient is talking about need, time, or money, that's a major. You don't handle that, you're going to get fired. What's a minor? The minor are typically the clinical questions. Like, is the doctor going to treat me that day? Is he going to take x-rays? Do you accept my insurance? Of course, that's a major because we're now in the money. Anytime you talk money, it's a major. Time and money are always majors, period. And you can never not handle those, period. So, having said that, these are big concepts. In other words, this isn't random stuff. And of course, the more you know it, the more you know how to, say the right things on the outside to get them in. That gets them in. That gets them to make the phone call. And then you need to go present time consciousness on the phone call because the only objective is to get them to day 2 with need, time, or money. I'm not going to talk about money or time past the day 1. You just risk losing them. That's not where they're at in the purchase cycle. It's called a paradigm shift. And paradigm shifts increase defenses and resistance, and decrease trust and confidence. That's what happens when you start violating these really normal human purchase patterns. And then the only goal on day 2 is to get them to day 3. So I'm only going to talk about need, time, or money relative to get them in day 2. We're not going to talk about anything else relative to time, nothing else relative to money. It's just the money that we need to get to day 2. That's it. And then day 2, the objective is to get them for the next 3 days. So I'm only going to talk about need relative to the next 3 days. That's it. I'm only going to talk about money for the next 3 days. That's it. I'm only going to talk about time for the next 3 days. That's it. These are rules. And then the goal for the day 4 is to get them to the first re-exam. See, that's how that works. So these are very segmented positions. All right. So what are the big keys? Present time consciousness. It's segmented by if they're on the outside and haven't called yet. Second step is if they're calling in. What's the goal there? The only goal on the outside is to get them to call in or schedule. We're only going to establish need and minimize the obstacles there. And it's only going to be for that time, for that one visit. That's it, nothing else. They call in. The only goal is to get them in for that one visit. That's it. So that's all I'm going to talk about with need, time, or money. I'm not going about day 2, day 3, day 4, nothing. It's just the time or money and need relative to getting them in for one day. That's it. Day 1, only thing we're going to talk about with need, time, or money is to get them to day 2. That's it. Day 2, we're only going to talk about need, time, or money to get them for the next 3 days. That's it. And we're going to pay a lot of attention to the natural purchase cycle. The natural purchase cycle is, what is my problem? Can you help? How long is it going to take to feel better, and what's it going to cost? Well, I can't answer all those at the very beginning. I'm totally violating everything. So when I answer those, this becomes very important relative to this thing called present time consciousness. You can't just say whatever you want, whenever the hell you want. Chances are you'll naturally just push people away and not even know it. And that happens a lot. Matter of fact, I'll tell you the number one most common way doctors lose patients is when they say they're a chiropractor. How many people say, oh, I got this problem or this problem? And then the patients start asking about, oh, can you help this or that? Or do you take this insurance? And the next thing the patient says, oh, the doctor says, yo, I can help that. Totally violating the need, time, or money concept. And then the potential patient says, well, give me your card. And then the doctor gives them their business card. And 87% of the time they never call. Why? Because the doctor totally violated every major principle of how we subconsciously buy things, our purchase patterns, our purchase cycle. He didn't even know it. So we're going to pay a lot of attention to need, time, or money. Need, time, or money is always called primary. You better handle that. They'll fire you for that. Secondary, those are typical clinical questions, things like that. And then there's what's called curiosity. So when somebody does say something, you kind of have to know, what's the importance of the question they're asking? Well, if it's anything about need, time, or money, you better shut up and listen, and you better handle it right now, right then. You got one swing at that ball, and you better hit it. And then if they'll ask you a couple, and if it's an obstacle question, same thing. You better handle that because you can't leave obstacles. Clinical questions are secondary questions. And then there's just curiosity questions that are irrelevant. If you didn't even ask them, it wouldn't matter. So we're paying attention to these topics. So we're obviously going to pay a lot of attention to need, time, or money, and especially the obstacle questions.